Well, let me ask you, Congresswoman Omar, about what Republicans are saying about you, that there is a pattern of anti-Semitic and other controversial statements that make you unfit to sit on, in your case, the House Foreign Affairs Committee.
I might have used words at the time that I didn't understand were trafficking in anti-Semitism. When that was brought to my attention, I apologized. I owned up to it. That's the kind of person that I am. And I continue to work with my colleagues and my community to fight against anti-Semitism. But to smear someone and their character, their love for their country, and the work that they get to do on a committee is wrong, and it is politically motivated. And in some cases is motivated by the fact that many of these members don't believe a Muslim, a refugee, an African should even be in Congress, let alone have the opportunity. I'm not making any accusations. I'm just laying out the facts. You remember Donald Trump coming into my state and saying Muslims, Somali refugees are infiltrating our country. You remember Marjorie Taylor Greene coming to Congress after Rashida and I got sworn in and saying Muslims are infiltrating Congress. You remember Boebert saying that I was a terrorist. What did McCarthy do? He said she apologized and we don't have to worry about her Islamophobia. That never happened.
This isn't about free speech. This is about downplaying one of the darkest days in our nation's history. Your take?
That's, of course, true, and she has a long history of not taking terrorism particularly seriously. In 2013, she did an interview in Minnesota in which she joked about people taking al-Qaeda and Hezbollah more seriously than they took America and England. And then in 2016, she wrote a letter in which she tried to have a judge be more lenient with people who tried to join ISIS, saying that, of course, these were people who only became violent because of American marginalization. And then in 2017, she wrote a column for Time magazine in which she suggested that America was rooted and founded on slavery and genocide. And in order for us not to look that in the face, instead, we focused on international terror. This is not someone who takes terrorism particularly seriously, so I am bewildered as to why quoting her would constitute some form of violation of her personage. It would be a violation of free speech or something nonsensical like that. Well, very odd, since Representative Omar has 3 times in the last 3 months been chided for openly anti-Semitic statements, and then the Democratic Party has defended her. I'm amused to watch as the Democratic Party suggests that criticism and quoting of Ilhan Omar amounts to violent incitement, where Representative Omar can say whatever Jew-hating thing she wants on a daily basis, and that is not incitement. Now, I agree, it's not incitement in either case, but to pretend that it is incitement when it's stuff you don't like, and it's not incitement when it's stuff that you do, seems pretty irresponsible at the mildest.
The background of Ilhan Omar is really fascinating, and of course, like so much in her background, completely unexplored. The media has no interest in delving into where she comes from, who her influences were, what her family members did. And I think the most amazing thing about her story is actually that she holds these views. She describes herself as an intersectional feminist. She's obsessed with identity politics. She sort of personifies the perfect multiculturalist leftist milieu, and she could have picked up those views as easily in the enclave in which she grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, as in the Somalia of her birth. And I think it really bears noting, incidentally, that no one has really ever talked about her family influences, even though she talks about quite frequently the influence of her father and grandfather on her own political course, and they were both members of the government. Her father called a teacher's teacher within the Somali regime, and her grandfather has been labeled a director of marine transport there. And that regime was a Marxist Islamist dictatorship. And that is not Ben Weingarten talking. That's actually how the New York Times described it, and how Siad Barre, the dictator who ruled Somalia, under which her family prospered, how he himself described it. She came over with her father and a sister as well in the early 90s, originally to Virginia, and then they resettled in the Minneapolis area, where there is a very large enclave with tens of thousands of Somali refugees who are resettled there. And again, it's quite interesting. No one has really done the digging, delved into what her father was doing there. But the reality is, as a teacher, and as many other teachers that she has cited, formed her kind of family background there and influenced her. A teacher in a Marxist Islamist regime, Soviet-backed, was themselves inculcated in the ruling Communist Party ideology of the Soviet Union, again, it was a Marxist Islamist dictatorship itself. And the fact that no one is even curious about what influence her family members had on her is quite interesting, as is the fact that by her own admission, she was privileged to use her own party's parlance in in Somalia, rather, before she went to a refugee camp in Kenya. She lived in a compound. There were beggars outside. Her family would feed those beggars. She talks about a house filled with books and the like. Just this wonderful paradise-like experience in, again, a Marxist Islamist dictatorship. She comes to the U.S., and again, what's amazing about her district is that her district, which consisted largely, and this is as a state representative, her district, which consisted largely of Somali refugees, also consisted as well of 2 college campuses. And it was actually those college students who pushed her over the top in helping her topple a 44-year incumbent in Minnesota State House to ascend to be a state representative, and then shortly thereafter, a member of the U.S. House as well. And I mentioned Obama before, and the parallel is interestingly that she was also a community organizer. She talked about the fact that her parents told her to organize for what she wanted to achieve in the U.S., her brand of justice, which of course is antithetical to the justice that you and I believe in. That she sort of personifies the unholy alliance between the left and Islamists. And I had Andy McCarthy write the foreword to this book. He wrote the book, The Grand Jihad, where he talked about sort of how these two sides reconcile their seemingly antithetical views on social issues and a whole number of other issues. And I think really the simplest answer here is that they are able to set aside their differences because it is Judeo-Christian Western civilization that stands in the way of both of their paths to conquest for power. Obviously, the worldview of the progressives flouts completely the ideals, principles, values, institutions of our founding. And of course, we know that Islamic supremacist ideology is inherently expansionist, totalitarian, cannot brook any sort of dissent. So in this regard, they're both totalitarian belief systems. And the stumbling block to those totalitarian belief systems is best represented in America. And so if you believe that America is inherently evil, it's a stumbling block to your system, as Ilhan Omar has argued, and she basically has called us, in far harsher terms, deplorable, irredeemable, ignorant, and the like, then naturally justice demands that you overturn that system. And so what I argue in the book, and I go back and look at the historical roots of both the Jew hatred among socialists and on the left, and the Jew hatred that has predominated in the Islamic world for centuries, they have come together really in the last 50 plus years, and it was in the Soviet Union and the Middle East, a very deeply intertwined alliance there against the West, which they would call, the capitalist, imperialist, oppressor West. And Ilhan Omar is sort of the modern instantiation of that belief system value and ultimately their goal of toppling us. It's really important to note that she was named the co-chair of his campaign in Minnesota, which is a pivotal state in 2020. So this isn't some bit player. This is actually a very substantial player in the Democratic Party today. And also with respect to Bernie Sanders labeling himself now embracing his Jewish identity, where before he completely ignored it, essentially, he has basically described his Jewish identity as leftism. And that speaks for itself, stands for itself. And I would argue that that is not actually what the religion stands for. And in any event, in terms of the whole anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism thing, not only does Ilhan Omar surround herself with people who attack Jews qua Jews, not just the Jewish state as the collective Jew. What I argue is that in reality, what that Jew hatred comes down to is a hatred of Jews and the Jewish state as representative of and a bulwark for Judeo-Christian Western civilization. And so the Jew hatred itself goes beyond just Jews to all of us, everyone in America who believes in our founding values, traditions, and principles. And I go in great detail in the book to show that she actually checks off every single box of Natan Sharansky's a 3D definition of what anti-Semitism is, what the State Department definition of anti-Semitism is, what the broadly recognized international definition of anti-Semitism is. But again, it's Jew hatred as a stand-in for hatred of us, hatred of all Americans.
That's all for today. Thank you. If you want global news to keep you up to date on any new developments, please subscribe our channel and forward our content with your friends on social media and email. Thank you very much for keep supporting me. Stay safe, be blessed. Namaste.
Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America.